She stood there, keys dangling in her sister's hand, while the whole family clapped like it was some grand award ceremony. The shine of that brand new car reflected on their smiles, but not on hers. They had done it again, handed over something that wasn't theirs to give, something she had fought for, sacrificed for, and earned. And yet the golden child, the sister, was celebrated as if she had conquered the world. They thought it was hers. They thought she had won. But hidden in a stack of papers no one bothered to read was the truth. The car didn't belong to her sister. It legally belonged to the one person they had all counted out. Now pause for a second. Imagine watching people cheer for someone else while holding a prize that's already yours. Imagine keeping your face calm, your voice steady, while inside you're laughing at the irony. That was her reality. A moment of humiliation on the surface. But secretly, it was the beginning of her victory. Her name? Julia Morgan. The quiet one. The overlooked one. The sister who had always been the background character in her own family story. If life were a play, she was the extra with no lines, while her sister Caroline took center stage with the spotlight burning bright. But here's what people never understood about Julia. Background characters sometimes rewrite the script. Before we dive into that turning point, the car, the family, and the hidden papers, we need to rewind. Because stories like Julia's don't begin at shiny showrooms or with brand new keys. They start much earlier, in the shadows, in the messy corners of childhood, where patterns of favoritism take root and injustice becomes a family tradition. See, every humiliation has a history. Every triumph has a trail of tears behind it. Julia's story is no different. That scene with the car wasn't just about a set of keys. It was the final act of years of being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. And here's the irony. The very family that dismissed her, the same people who thought she was powerless, were the reason she became strong enough to flip the script. So buckle up, because this isn't a simple sibling rivalry story. It's about quiet strength, hidden sacrifices, and a victory that no one saw coming until it was too late. We're going back to the days when Julia's worth was measured against Caroline's shadow. Back to the struggles, the sacrifices, and the decisions that set the stage for one of the most ironic moments of her life. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Julia Morgan wasn't born invisible. She was made invisible. In the beginning, she was just another little girl in a middle-class family, running around the yard with scraped knees and wild dreams. Her parents were ordinary people, good in some ways, blind in others. But somewhere along the line, a subtle favoritism crept into their home, one that grew louder and sharper with every passing year. And at the center of it all was her sister, Caroline. Caroline wasn't just the older sister, she was the family's crown jewel, the one with the pretty curls, the charming smile, the kind of child neighbors complimented at every church gathering. That one's going to make you proud, people would say, pointing at Caroline, and her parents believed it. They soaked it up. Every ribbon she won at school, every small achievement, was celebrated like a parade. Julia, meanwhile, sat in the same room, holding her own report card, waiting for someone to notice. Her grades were good, sometimes even better than Caroline's. But praise? That was reserved for the chosen child. Julia was the quiet one, the helper, the one who understood when her needs were put second. This wasn't about sibling rivalry. It was about erasure. Growing up in Caroline's shadow left scars Julia didn't even recognize at first. She dreamed big, like every kid does. While Caroline talked about being a singer or an actress, Julia wanted to be practical. She loved numbers, patterns, and order. Her teachers said she had the makings of a brilliant accountant. She wanted to be the first in her family to graduate college with honors. She wanted to prove that she mattered. But life has a way of bending dreams until they almost snap. College started as a bright spot. Julia worked nights at the local diner, saving every tip just to pay tuition and buy used textbooks. She was exhausted, but proud. For the first time, she felt like she was carving her own path. Yet while she struggled to stay afloat, her family seemed blind to her effort. They'd brag about Caroline's internships and weekend travels, while Julia quietly counted coins for bus fare. And then the unraveling began. Her father fell sick. It wasn't sudden, but it was devastating. Hospital visits became the new normal. Bills piled up, and every conversation at home ended with one question: who's going to help? Julia didn't hesitate. She left classes, picked up double shifts, and funneled every paycheck into keeping the lights on. Caroline? She was too busy building her future. Julia's dreams didn't die in a dramatic explosion. They suffocated slowly under the weight of responsibility. Each semester, she promised herself she'd return to school. Each semester, another crisis dragged her further away. When her father passed, Julia was 22, standing at his funeral with calloused hands from waitressing and an unpaid tuition balance she knew she'd never catch up on. The grief was heavy, but what cut deeper was the silence. No one acknowledged her sacrifices. No one said, "You held this family together." They simply turned their eyes back to Caroline, who stood by the casket, looking graceful, like the heroine in a movie. Still, Julia didn't complain. She told herself that family was family. That duty mattered more than recognition. She worked, she saved, she survived. Her 20s slipped by like that. Quiet resilience, small acts of survival. She knew how to stretch $40 through the week, how to patch up old clothes, how to keep her dignity while standing in line at a food pantry. She learned resilience not as a choice, but as a lifestyle. There were moments, though, tiny flashes, when her old dreams flickered. Sometimes she'd find herself staring at spreadsheets on a library computer after a long shift just to keep her mind sharp. Sometimes she'd sketch out business plans in the margins of her notebook while customers barked orders for pancakes and coffee. Those quiet moments were her rebellion, proof that even if life forced her down, she hadn't surrendered completely. But just when she thought things couldn't get harder, betrayal came from the last place she expected: her own blood. When her mother downsized the house after their father's death, the family gathered to divide belongings. Julia didn't care much about furniture or old dishes. She only wanted a small set of savings her father had once promised would go toward her education. It wasn't much, but it represented hope. That's when she discovered Caroline had already claimed it. Not asked, not shared. Claimed. "It made sense," her mother said gently. "Caroline needs it more right now. She's applying for graduate school." Julia didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply folded the pain into her chest and carried on. Because what else could she do? Fighting would only brand her as jealous, ungrateful, difficult. From that day forward, she knew one truth. In her family's eyes, Caroline's dreams were worth funding. Julia's were worth forgetting. Yet here's the part no one saw. Every sacrifice carved her into someone sharper, someone stronger. While Caroline floated through life with handouts and applause, Julia was learning how to endure storms without an umbrella. She was becoming the kind of woman who could survive anything, and sometimes survival itself is the seed of greatness. Julia's past wasn't filled with glamorous achievements or applause. It was stitched together with quiet resilience, hidden sacrifices, and invisible scars. But it's exactly those scars that shaped the woman who, years later, would stand in that driveway watching her sister celebrate a car that legally wasn't hers. Because while Caroline was busy being handed everything, Julia was busy learning how to take back what was rightfully hers. Julia Morgan's life had been a long lesson in invisibility. But even invisible people sometimes stumble across moments that change everything. Her turning point didn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It came quietly, wrapped in exhaustion and chance. By her late 20s, Julia had settled into a routine, 2 jobs, endless bills, and a constant balancing act between survival and sanity. She waitressed in the mornings, handled bookkeeping for a small auto repair shop in the evenings, and went home to a rented room so tiny that her closet was just a nail on the wall. But if there was one thing she clung to, it was the dignity of work. Numbers, especially, gave her peace. Amid all the chaos, balance sheets made sense, and that's where her story began to shift. One evening, the shop's owner, a grizzled mechanic named Frank, left her in charge while he rushed to deal with a family emergency. It was supposed to be a quiet night, file some invoices, lock the doors, go home. But as Julia combed through the records, something odd caught her eye. A set of payments didn't add up. Parts were being billed that never seemed to arrive. Customers were charged for work that never happened. At first, she thought it was sloppy record-keeping. But Julia had lived her whole life in the shadows of half-truths. Her gut told her this wasn't a mistake. So she stayed late, combing through pages of transactions. Her heart pounded as she traced the numbers. It was fraud. Small scale, maybe, but deliberate. Someone at the shop was skimming money, and Frank, the man who had given her steady work, didn't seem to know. She sat there in the dim office, staring at the evidence. A choice hovered in the air like a storm cloud. Ignore it, stay safe, keep the little security she had, or take a risk and speak up. Julia had been silent her whole life. Silent when her dreams were pushed aside. Silent when her family gave everything to her sister. Silent when Caroline took what was meant for her. But silence had only made her invisible. For the first time, she decided to take a risk. The next morning, she handed Frank a folder. No accusations, no dramatics, just numbers, facts, evidence. He spent an hour flipping through the papers, his jaw tightening. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't disappointed. They were impressed. "You've got a sharp mind, Julia," he said. "Sharper than anyone I've had in this office." It was the first time someone outside her family saw her worth. That single sentence felt heavier than a lifetime of neglect. From that day, things shifted. Frank pulled her deeper into the business side of the shop. He taught her how to read contracts, how to negotiate with vendors, how to see beyond numbers, into strategy. For Julia, it was like stepping into sunlight after years underground. Her confidence grew, but with growth came new conflict. Caroline noticed. At family dinners, she'd sneer at Julia's work clothes. "Still playing with receipts? That's cute," she'd say, sipping her wine. Caroline was pursuing graduate school in marketing, funded, of course, by the money their father once promised Julia. She loved reminding everyone that she was on the successful path. Julia stayed quiet outwardly, but inside, a different. Fire burned now. Every sarcastic remark was fuel. Every slight was another reason to push harder. And then came the car. It started with their mother. She announced one Sunday lunch that Caroline needed a new car for her internships and city commute. Julia had no opinion until she learned whose name the financing was supposed to fall under, hers. Because Julia, through years of quiet work and frugal living, had managed what no one expected. She had decent credit. She had savings. She had stability. And her mother, without blinking, suggested she help Caroline secure the car loan. It was déjà vu. The same pattern replaying. Caroline's wants dressed up as needs. Julia's hard work used as the stepping stone. The family clapped like it was noble. "She's your sister. It's just paperwork," they said. But this time, Julia wasn't silent. She smiled politely, nodded, and agreed to help. But inside, a plan was forming. Because while her family still saw the invisible, compliant Julia, she wasn't that girl anymore. She had learned the power of numbers, of contracts, of details hidden in the fine print. When the dealership papers came, Julia reviewed every page carefully. The loan wasn't in Caroline's name, it was in hers, which meant the car wasn't a gift. It was her legal property. Caroline might hold the keys, but Julia would hold the title. It was the perfect irony. The family thought they had orchestrated another handout to the golden child. But what they had really done was hand Julia the one thing she had never been given: leverage. Of course, leverage comes with pressure. Caroline flaunted the car around town as if she owned it outright. The family bragged. Julia stayed silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't defeat. It was strategy. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Was she being petty? Was it revenge disguised as justice? She wrestled with the ethics of it late at night, staring at the paperwork in her tiny apartment. But each time she remembered the years of sacrifice, the nights she gave up food so her sister could shine, the betrayal of her father's savings, it felt less like revenge and more like balance. Life had taken so much from her. Maybe it was finally giving something back. But her sister didn't see it that way. Caroline grew bolder, meaner, louder with her victories. At one family gathering, she raised a glass of champagne and toasted herself to being the one who always gets ahead. Everyone laughed. Julia smiled quietly. What no one realized was that Caroline's victory sat on borrowed ground. The car she paraded as proof of her superiority was legally out of her reach. And when the time came, Julia knew the truth would unravel everything. The turning point wasn't the fraud at the auto shop or even the car itself. It was Julia's awakening. She realized she wasn't powerless. She had learned how to read between the lines, literally and figuratively. She had found her strength not in shouting, but in planning, and planning was about to change everything. The driveway was buzzing like a celebration. Balloons tied to the mailbox, neighbors leaning against fences to watch. Caroline stood at the center, her smile wide, her champagne glass raised as though she'd just won a prize on national television. "This," she said, patting the hood, "of the gleaming new car, is what hard work and ambition look like." The family erupted in cheers. Cameras clicked. Videos rolled for Instagram stories. Julia stood quietly near the porch, her hands folded, her lips curved in a polite smile. On the surface, she was just another bystander in Caroline's victory parade. Inside, though, her heart was pounding like a drum, because she knew something none of them did. The car Caroline flaunted wasn't hers, not legally, not officially, not in any way that mattered when the truth came crashing down. For weeks, Julia had said nothing, watching as her sister preened and paraded the vehicle through town. At first, the silence burned. Memories of her past humiliation replayed in her head, the years of being overlooked. But this time, silence wasn't weakness. It was power, and that power was about to erupt. The moment came unexpectedly. A local paper had sent a reporter to cover a community story on young professionals succeeding against the odds. Caroline, of course, had nominated herself, and now she was being interviewed in front of neighbors, friends, and her proud, unsuspecting parents. "So, Caroline," the reporter asked, microphone in hand, "tell us about your achievement. How does it feel to earn something so major all on your own?" The words stung Julia like a slap. On your own. That was the lie she had lived under her whole life. Caroline receiving credit for things Julia's sacrifices made possible. Caroline smirked for the camera. "Well, I've always believed hard work pays off. Some people just dream. I go out and get what I want." The crowd clapped. The spotlight burned brighter, and that was the breaking point. Julia stepped forward. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for her voice to carry. "Actually," she said, her tone calm but cutting, "that car doesn't belong to Caroline." Silence. Heads turned. The reporter blinked, confused. The family frowned. Caroline laughed nervously. "Julia!" she hissed. "Not now!" But Julia didn't stop. For the first time in her life, she didn't shrink back into the shadows. She pulled a folder from her bag, papers neatly clipped, the title bold at the top. "This," Julia continued, lifting the document for everyone to see, "is the loan agreement, the registration, the insurance. Every single page lists one legal owner, and it's not Caroline." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporter leaned closer. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying the car she's celebrating as her own is mine," Julia said firmly. "Legally, financially, officially, mine. She can hold the keys. She can take photos. But without me, this car doesn't move an inch." The driveway fell silent. The balloons fluttered in the breeze, awkward now, almost mocking. Caroline's face twisted. "You're lying. This is ridiculous." She reached for the folder, but Julia pulled it back. "No," Julia said, her voice sharper now. "What's ridiculous is a lifetime of being told I was less, of watching every opportunity handed to you while I worked myself raw. What's ridiculous is pretending you earned what I sacrificed for, not anymore." Her words hit like thunder. For years she had swallowed her pain, folded her humiliation into silence, but here, in front of everyone, she unfolded it. She let them see. Caroline stammered, searching for her usual confidence. The family shifted uncomfortably, realizing this wasn't just about a car. It was about years of injustice, years they had ignored. The reporter, sensing a story bigger than he had imagined, raised the microphone again. "Julia, would you like to explain?" Julia took a deep breath. "I worked. I saved. I built credit no one thought I could. And when the loan was signed, it was my name that secured it, not Caroline's. She never qualified. The truth is, this so-called achievement was never hers. It was mine all along." The crowd murmured, shocked. Some nodded, recognizing the weight behind her words. Others just stared, stunned. Caroline's champagne glass trembled in her hand. For the first time, her perfect image cracked. Julia turned, not toward her sister, but toward the people who mattered most, her parents. "You spent years telling me to be the quiet one, to let her shine, but silence doesn't erase worth. You never saw me. But that doesn't mean I wasn't here, building something, surviving, proving myself. And now, you can't ignore it." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice didn't break. It was strong, sharp, unshakable. The breaking point wasn't just about a car. It was about reclaiming her place, reclaiming her voice, reclaiming every sacrifice that had been buried under Caroline's spotlight. She closed the folder and stepped back. The silence hung heavy, then shattered under the weight of truth. The reporter cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "I think our story just took a very unexpected turn." Julia didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply straightened her shoulders and walked away, leaving the crowd stunned, her sister speechless, and her family forced to confront the truth they had denied for years. That day, in the driveway, Julia stopped being invisible, and for the first time, the world saw her, not as Caroline's shadow, but as her own light. Dear audience, if you're enjoying Julia's story, don't forget to give this video a like. It really helps. Ruth didn't wait for applause when she walked out of that boardroom. She didn't crave it, didn't expect it. For years, she had cleaned up their messes quietly, without thanks. This time wasn't any different. She wasn't doing this for fame. She was doing it for freedom. The media storm came fast. By the next morning, headlines read, "Janitor exposes multi-million-dollar corporate fraud." Paparazzi camped outside her small apartment. Neighbors peeked through curtains, and reporters begged for an interview. But Ruth kept her focus steady. She had been invisible too long to let sudden attention shake her. Instead, she turned to the one person who mattered most, her son, Daniel. He looked at her with wide, admiring eyes. "Mom, you're a hero." And for the first time in years, Ruth allowed herself to believe it. The legal system moved slowly, but the evidence Ruth provided was airtight. The executives who once mocked her now sat in courtrooms, suits wrinkled, faces pale, lawyers scrambling to explain what couldn't be explained away. The company, desperate to avoid total collapse, offered Ruth a settlement package beyond anything she could have imagined. The number written on that check looked like a dream. Too many zeros to process at once. But Ruth didn't see dollar signs. She saw doors, doors that had been closed her entire life, doors to education, doors to dignity, doors to finally breathing. Without counting every penny, she cashed that check not to buy luxury, but to build legacy. The first thing she did was move Daniel into a better neighborhood. No more broken elevators, no more leaky ceilings, no more nights where he had to do homework by flashlight when the power got cut off. The second thing she did was invest in herself. She dusted off the degree that had hung, forgotten, on her wall. She updated her certifications, took courses, sharpened the very skills she once studied late at night on a cracked phone screen. And then, Ruth made her boldest move. She opened Carter Forensic Consulting, not in some shiny skyscraper, but in a modest office above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread floated in through the vents every morning, and that was enough to make it feel like home. Her mission was clear: to fight for financial justice. Not for billion-dollar firms, but for nonprofits, small businesses, and ordinary people cheated by a system too complicated for them to navigate alone. Word spread quickly. Within months, Carter Forensic Consulting had clients lined up. Fortune. 500 companies even came knocking, desperate for her expertise. But Ruth set her boundaries. She chose her work with care, taking cases that aligned with her values, not just her bank account. But perhaps Ruth's proudest work wasn't the consulting, it was the mentorship program. She launched Free Evening, classes for single mothers who wanted to learn accounting, financial literacy, and business basics. Women who once thought numbers were their enemy began to see them as tools for survival and power. One of them, Maria, went from cleaning houses to running her own bookkeeping service. Another, Janine, used Ruth's training to finally get out of debt and open a savings account for her children's future. Every success story lit Ruth's heart like a candle. She had once been that woman, exhausted, unseen, and overlooked. Now she was proof that they could rise too. Daniel thrived as well. With stability and encouragement, he soared academically. He became top of his class, captain of the debate team, and a scholarship hopeful. Sometimes, Ruth would watch him sleep and whisper, "All this was worth it for you," because it was Daniel who had fueled her fire. When her body ached from scrubbing floors, when her spirit cracked under the weight of silence, it was always Daniel's small voice, asking for bedtime stories that kept her going. And now, he looked at her not just as mom, but as his role model. Ruth's life didn't suddenly become perfect. She still carried scars, memories of humiliation, of nights crying quietly. So her son wouldn't hear. But now those scars weren't symbols of weakness. They were proof of survival. She walked into rooms differently now, head high, shoulders back, no longer invisible. Once people had spoken over her. Now when Ruth Carter spoke, people listened. Years later, when asked in an interview what motivated her to act that night in Conference Room B, Ruth smiled. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. When you've been ignored your whole life, you learn that silence only protects the powerful. I was done being silent. Her words resonated far beyond that interview. They became a quote printed on posters, shared online, repeated in classrooms. Because Ruth's story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every person who had ever been underestimated, every worker who had ever been dismissed, every dreamer who had been told to stay in their lane. And so the janitor who once mopped floors quietly became something greater, a symbol of resilience. Her journey reminded the world of a timeless truth. You don't need permission to reclaim your power. You just need courage. And for you, dear viewers, what do you think of Ruth's transformation? Was her victory sweeter because she never sought revenge, only justice? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And hey, if Ruth's story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting. Stories of survival, of courage, of redemption. From forgotten to unforgettable. This was Ruth Carter's journey. They once laughed at her, pointed at her uniform, and said she was just a janitor. But Ruth's life became living proof that labels don't define us, choices do. She wasn't sweeping floors. She was sweeping away excuses. She wasn't wiping windows. She was keeping her vision clear, waiting for the right moment. Every shift, every paycheck stretched too thin, every lonely night when she studied numbers on her cracked phone screen, it was all training. Quiet, invisible training for the moment she would finally step into her own power. And when that day came, she didn't need to shout, beg, or prove herself. She simply laid the truth on the table, numbers no one could argue with, and walked out with her dignity intact. But here's the twist most people don't know. Ruth didn't just change her own life. Months later, her consulting firm landed. A massive government contract, auditing companies that had long exploited low-wage workers. And the first person she hired? A cafeteria worker who had once slipped her free meals during her hardest days. That woman is now one of Ruth's top analysts. Her story became less about revenge and more about redemption, not just for her, but for everyone society had once ignored. Her son often tells people, "My mom doesn't just balance books, she balances lives." And he's right. So what do we really learn from Ruth's journey? That resilience isn't loud, that real courage often wears a simple uniform, and that the very thing people use to dismiss you can become the stage where you rise. Now I'll ask you, how many Ruths have you walked past today? The cashier who smiled at you though her feet ached. The bus driver who greeted you though he hasn't slept. The neighbor juggling 3 jobs to pay rent. Do you see them as invisible or as undiscovered legends? Because Ruth reminds us of something powerful. The world doesn't always clap for the ones holding it together, but without them, everything falls apart. Her mop didn't define her. Her dreams did. Her silence didn't mean weakness. It meant strategy. And her pain, it was never wasted. It became her proof. So the next time you look at someone society calls ordinary, remember, the quietest person in the room might just be the one who saves it. And as for Ruth, she doesn't chase applause. She builds futures. That's her legacy. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.